Amazing viewers, before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. A life-changing decision. What would you do if you had to choose between your own life and the life of your unborn child? For Emma Harper, a devoted mother-to-be from a strict religious community, that choice became a heart-wrenching reality, one that would leave even the most experienced doctors in tears. But what made her story even more devastating was the shocking truth she uncovered about the man she once trusted with her life. Emma had grown up in a small, tightly knit religious community nestled in the rolling farmlands of Pennsylvania. Life there was simple, bound by faith, tradition, and a rigid set of rules that shaped every decision. She had been taught from a young age that a woman's greatest purpose was to marry, bear children, and uphold the beliefs of the community. And she embraced this path with unwavering devotion, believing that love, faith, and family would be the pillars of her happiness. When she was introduced to Jacob Harper, the son of a respected family, she felt like all her prayers had been answered. He was everything she had been raised to believe was important. Strong in faith, charming, and well-respected. Their courtship was brief but approved by both families, and soon they were married in a modest but joyful ceremony. Emma had never known romantic love before, so every kind word, every smile, every gentle touch from Jacob felt like proof that their love was real. The first months of marriage were peaceful, though not as blissful as she had imagined. Jacob was distant, distracted, often coming home late from the market, and rarely showing the passion she had expected. Still, she told herself it was simply the adjustment of married life. But as months turned into years, whispers began circulating in the community. Why haven't they had a child yet? Someone would ask at every gathering. Perhaps it's God's will, others would respond, though their voices carried the sharp edge of gossip. Emma, too, wondered. She prayed every night for a child, believing that becoming a mother would finally bring warmth and love into her home. But Jacob, he was indifferent, brushing aside her concerns with empty reassurances. "It'll happen when it's meant to happen," he would say, his tone flat. By their third anniversary, the tension in their marriage had become undeniable. Then, one evening at a community gathering, Emma overheard a conversation that shattered her faith in her marriage. "You know Jacob only married her for her family's farm, right?" a woman whispered to another. "Oh, everyone knows that," the other replied. "He never really loved her. He just wanted the land." Emma felt her chest tighten. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her dress. She wanted to confront them, to demand the truth. But a paralyzing fear held her back. That night, as she lay beside Jacob in bed, she wanted to ask him outright. Had their love been a lie? But the words refused to leave her lips. Instead, she buried her pain, convincing herself that her love for him was enough. For the next few years, she poured every ounce of herself into their marriage. She worked tirelessly, managing their home, tending to their farm, and suppressing the growing ache in her heart. Even when Jacob's outbursts became more frequent, when he snapped at her over minor inconveniences, when he stayed away longer and longer, she told herself that this was what marriage was supposed to be. That sacrifice was part of love. But then, in their 7th year of marriage, something changed. One morning, Emma woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous. She barely managed to get out of bed, her body aching in ways she had never felt before. When she looked in the mirror, she noticed her clothes were suddenly too tight. A trip to the community's midwife confirmed it. "You're pregnant, Emma." Tears of pure joy filled her eyes. She had prayed for this moment for so long. It was a miracle, a sign that God had not abandoned her. She rushed home to tell Jacob, convinced that this news would bring them together, that their child would mend the broken pieces of their love. But Jacob's reaction was cold. "That's good," he muttered before returning to his work. Emma stood there, stunned, the happiness draining from her chest. For the first time, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if Jacob didn't want this baby? As the weeks passed, the joy of pregnancy became overshadowed by something far more frightening. Her belly swelled at an alarming rate, far faster than any other woman she had known. Fatigue weighed her down like an anchor, and sharp pains racked her body. But every time she brought it up to Jacob, he dismissed her with the same harsh words. Stop questioning God's plan. You're fine. The baby is fine. Just have faith. Even when walking became difficult, when nausea stole her appetite, when she could no longer ignore the constant dizziness, he refused to acknowledge her pain. Desperate, Emma turned to her mother, Margaret, hoping for comfort. "Mom, I'm scared," she admitted one afternoon, sitting in the familiar warmth of her childhood home. "Something's wrong. I need to see a doctor." Margaret's face darkened. "Emma, you know how our community feels about that. Going to a doctor would cause a scandal. You must trust in God." Emma felt her heart sink. But what if something is wrong with the baby? What if? "No." Margaret's voice was firm. "God gave you this child, and He will protect you both. You mustn't doubt Him." Emma left her mother's house with tears streaming down her face. She had always believed that faith could move mountains, but what if faith wasn't enough? As the days stretched on, Emma's condition worsened. Her belly had grown so large that she struggled to even get out of bed. She could feel something pressing against her ribs, making it difficult to breathe. Then one evening, as she lay awake, she overheard Jacob speaking outside their home. "If her family's farm wasn't so profitable, I never would have married her." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. How could he say such a thing? The marriage she had fought so hard to protect had been a lie all along. That night, Emma made a decision. If Jacob refused to protect her and their child, she would have to do it herself. Before dawn, while Jacob was still asleep, she packed a small bag with only the essentials. With one last look at the house she had tried to make a home, she stepped out into the cold night. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for certain. She had to survive. The journey to survival. Emma Harper had never known the kind of fear that gripped her now. The icy wind bit at her skin as she trudged down the dirt path, leading away from the only home she had ever known. The darkness of the night swallowed the familiar, making every shadow feel like a lurking danger. But none of it compared to the terror of what she was leaving behind. The husband who had never truly loved her, the community that had turned a blind eye to her suffering, and the suffocating silence that had forced her to endure everything alone. Each step she took was a rebellion against the years of being told to wait, to pray, to suffer in silence. For the first time in her life, she was making a decision for herself. But her body was weak, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. Her belly was so swollen it made movement feel impossible. She could feel pressure against her ribs, each breath more difficult than the last. The baby inside her was growing too fast, far more than it should have been. She didn't need a doctor to tell her something was terribly wrong. She had to make it to the city. She had to find help. The road stretched on endlessly before her, each step more difficult than the last. She had walked miles already, her feet swollen, her back aching, but she couldn't stop. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the movement inside. Her baby was still fighting. And so she would too. Her mind drifted to Jacob, his cruel words, the way he had dismissed her pain as if it were nothing. She had spent years convincing herself that his neglect was just stress, that his coldness was simply how men were raised in their community. But that night, as she had overheard his words, "If her family's farm wasn't so profitable, I never would have married her," something inside her had snapped. He never loved her. The realization hit her with a force so strong it nearly took her breath away. She had built her entire life around a lie. By sunrise, the city was finally within sight, But Emma was past the point of exhaustion. Her legs wobbled beneath her, her head spun, and her stomach twisted in pain. She needed help now. As she approached the city limits, a sharp pain shot through her belly, forcing her to double over. She let out a strangled cry, her hands clutching her stomach. Something was happening. No, not now. Not here. She forced herself to move, her vision blurring as she reached the hospital doors. With the last of her strength, she stumbled inside, her body collapsing to the cold floor. Everything around her faded to black. The hospital's discovery. When Emma awoke, she was lying in a hospital bed, IVs attached to her arms, and the steady beeping of machines surrounding her. The air smelled sterile, and the bright lights stung her eyes. She turned her head slightly, seeing a woman in a white coat beside her. Emma. The woman's voice was calm but firm. My name is Dr. Laura Morgan. You collapsed at our entrance. We're running tests to find out what's happening with your pregnancy. Can you tell me how far along you are? Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. 4 months, she whispered. Dr. Morgan's expression shifted, her brows knitting together in concern. Emma, your baby is measuring closer to 8 months. Emma's heart stopped. That's impossible, she stammered, shaking her head. I know this is a lot to process, Dr. Morgan said gently. But something unusual is happening. Your body is under severe stress, and we need to act quickly. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She had known something was wrong. She had felt it in the way her body ached, in the way her belly swelled far too quickly, in the way Jacob refused to acknowledge her pain. Will my baby be okay? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Morgan hesitated. We're doing everything we can, but there's something else we need to discuss. She pulled a chair close, her eyes filled with concern. Emma, we ran some additional tests, and we found something alarming. Emma's hands clenched the hospital blanket. What is it? She breathed. Dr. Morgan exhaled slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. Your pregnancy is putting your life in serious danger. Your body is struggling to sustain the baby, and if we don't intervene soon, you might not survive childbirth. Emma felt her world shatter. No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Emma, we need to discuss your options, Dr. Morgan continued. If we don't act soon, this could become life-threatening for both you and the baby. Emma's mind raced. She had fought so hard to get here, to escape, to protect this child. And now they were telling her she might have to choose between her own life and her baby's. Tears welled in her eyes. Had she really come all this way only to face this? But then she thought of Jacob, of the life she had left behind. If she died, her baby would be raised by him, raised in that same community that had failed her. No, she would not let that happen. Emma clenched her fists, a new fire burning inside her. Save my baby, she said firmly, tears streaming down her face. No matter what happens to me, make sure my child lives. Dr. Morgan looked at her for a long moment before reaching over and gently taking her hand. We will do everything we can. But Emma, you have to fight too. Emma nodded, determination replacing her fear. She had survived Jacob's lies, the community's rejection, and the impossible journey here. She would survive this too. She had to. For her child. The truth beneath the surface. When Emma Harper closed her eyes, she was back in the fields of her childhood, golden wheat swaying in the wind, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the distant sound of hymns carried through the air from the little chapel at the heart of her community. But when she opened them, the sterile white walls of the hospital reminded her that those days were long gone. A sharp beeping sound brought her back to reality. She turned her head, wincing as pain shot through her body. The machines surrounding her blinked rhythmically, monitoring her vitals. A thin oxygen tube rested beneath her nose, helping her breathe. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The escape. The collapse at the hospital doors. the doctor's words that still echoed in her mind. "Emma, we ran some additional tests, and we found something alarming. Her baby was growing at an unnatural rate, and the pregnancy was slowly killing her." She swallowed hard, placing a trembling hand on her belly. The child inside her moved, as if sensing her distress. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I'm not giving up on you." A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Laura Morgan entered, her kind eyes filled with the same concern they had held the night before. Behind her stood a nurse with a clipboard, scribbling something down. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Morgan said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got run over by a train," Emma admitted weakly. Dr. Morgan gave a small, understanding smile. "That's to be expected. Your body has been under extreme stress, and your vitals are still unstable. We're monitoring everything closely." Emma bit her lip. "Is my baby okay?" Dr. Morgan sighed, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "The baby is strong. That's the good news, but we need to talk about the complications we've uncovered." Emma's heart pounded. Complications. The nurse handed Dr. Morgan a file, and she opened it, flipping through the pages before settling on one. "Emma, we've confirmed that your baby has a rare condition called fetal hyperplasia, which means the baby is developing at nearly twice the normal rate." Emma's breath hitched. "Twice the rate?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "At 4 months, your baby is the size of an 8-month pregnancy. If this continues, your body won't be able to sustain the pregnancy to full term." Emma felt the walls closing in on her. "So, what does that mean for us?" she whispered. Dr. Morgan hesitated, then placed a reassuring hand on Emma's. "You have a difficult decision ahead of you. If we try to continue this pregnancy naturally, there is a very high chance that both you and the baby could not make it." Emma squeezed her eyes shut, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. "But there is another option," Dr. Morgan continued. "We can deliver the baby early through an emergency procedure. It will be risky, and the baby will need extensive medical care. But it might be the only way to save both of you." Emma opened her eyes, tears already slipping down her cheeks. "Is there a chance my baby could die?" Dr. Morgan's face softened. "There's always a risk, Emma. But if we do nothing, the odds are even worse. I know this is overwhelming, but I promise we will fight for both of you." Emma stared at the ceiling, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. For years, she had prayed for this child, this miracle, and now she was being told she had to risk everything just to keep it alive. But deep inside, she already knew her answer. "Do whatever you need to do to save my baby," she whispered. Dr. Morgan gave a small nod. "We'll start preparing immediately." The shocking revelation. As the nurses left the room, Emma allowed herself to breathe, if only for a moment. But that peace was short-lived, because just then her hospital door swung open, and standing there, his face filled with something between rage and disbelief, was Jacob. Emma's blood ran cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob strode into the room, his eyes darting around before settling on her. "You really thought you could just run off?" he hissed, voice low but sharp. Emma felt her pulse skyrocket. "How did you find me?" Jacob crossed his arms. "Your mother told me." Emma's stomach twisted. Of course she did. Her own mother had betrayed her. Jacob stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've humiliated me, Emma. You've shamed our entire family by running off like some wild animal." Emma scoffed, even as her hands trembled beneath the blanket. "I left because I knew you didn't care about me. I heard you, Jacob. I heard what you said that night." For the first time, Jacob hesitated. Emma's voice grew stronger. "You never loved me. You married me for my family's land. And now, when I'm fighting for my life and my babies, you show up just to berate me." Jacob's jaw tightened. "You're my wife," he snapped. "That means you don't get to just walk away." Emma's fingers clenched into fists. "I may be your wife, but I will never be your prisoner again." Jacob stepped forward, but before he could get another word out, the door swung open again. And this time, Dr. Morgan stood there, arms crossed, eyes blazing with authority. "Mr. Harper," she said firmly, stepping between him and Emma, "this is a hospital, and I will not tolerate you disturbing my patient. You need to leave." Jacob stiffened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "She's my wife. And right now, she's my patient. That means she's under my care. If you refuse to leave, I will have security escort you out." Jacob looked back at Emma, his face hard with barely concealed rage. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Emma met his gaze head-on. "I already regret wasting years of my life on you." With a final glare, Jacob turned and stormed out. Dr. Morgan let out a slow breath before turning to Emma. "Are you okay?" Emma exhaled shakily. For the first time in years, yes. And as she pressed a hand to her belly, she felt a new kind of strength rising inside her. She had fought so hard to escape. Now she would fight even harder to survive. A mother's battle for life. Emma Harper had never felt so fragile, yet never so determined. Lying in the hospital bed, she clutched her swollen belly, her fingers lightly tracing over the stretched skin. The baby inside her moved, a reassuring reminder that this tiny life was still fighting. And so, she would fight too. The confrontation with Jacob had left her shaken, but it had also freed her. She had spent years trapped in a loveless marriage, bound by duty, faith, and the fear of disappointing her community. But now, she had chosen herself and her baby over everything else. A nurse entered the room, adjusting the IV in her arm. "You've been through a lot," the nurse said kindly, offering Emma a small smile. "But you're in the best hands now. Dr. Morgan is the best when it comes to high-risk pregnancies." Emma nodded weakly. She wanted to believe that, but there was still so much uncertainty ahead. A few moments later, Dr. Laura Morgan stepped into the room, her expression calm but serious. "Emma, we've gone over all the test results," she began, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Your condition is deteriorating quickly. Your kidneys are under severe stress, your blood pressure is dangerously high, and your body simply can't support the rapid growth of your baby much longer." Emma swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "So what happens now?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Morgan took a deep breath. "We can't wait any longer. We need to deliver the baby tonight." Emma felt her stomach drop. Tonight. But the baby isn't ready. It's too soon. Dr. Morgan leaned in, her voice steady and reassuring. "Emma, if we wait any longer, you could go into heart failure. Your organs are struggling, and there's a very real chance that we could lose you both." Emma's breath hitched. She had known things were bad, but not this bad. Her hands trembled as she reached for Dr. Morgan's. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "What are the baby's chances?" Dr. Morgan hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "The baby is strong, Emma. And with the right care, we believe we can give them a fighting chance. But we need to act quickly. We'll be performing an emergency C-section under strict monitoring. Our neonatal team is on standby to take immediate care of the baby after delivery." Emma pressed a hand to her belly. "Will I make it?" Dr. Morgan's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll do everything in our power to make sure you both survive. But Emma, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that there might be complications. You've lost a lot of blood, and we might need to take additional emergency measures to save your life." Emma closed her eyes, waves of fear crashing over her. But then, a soft, rhythmic movement inside her. Her baby. The child she had prayed for, the child she had run away to save, the child who had given her the strength to break free from Jacob's control. She wouldn't let fear win. She wouldn't give up now. Emma lifted her head, wiping away a tear. "Do it. Save my baby." Dr. Morgan gave her a reassuring squeeze on the hand before standing. "We'll begin preparations immediately. Stay strong, Emma." The emergency surgery begins. Emma was wheeled down the stark white hallway, the fluorescent lights above her blurring as she struggled to keep her breathing steady. A nurse ran her fingers gently through Emma's hair. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just a little longer." The doors to the operating room swung open, and the bright overhead lights shone down on her. The medical team moved quickly, surrounding her bed, preparing the instruments, setting up the monitors. "All right, Emma." Dr. Morgan's voice was calm, but firm. "We're going to give you an epidural so you won't feel any pain. I want you to focus on breathing, okay?" Emma nodded, her fingers clenching the hospital sheets. As the anesthesia set in, a deep chill settled over her body. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. A nurse, standing near her head, leaned in with a gentle smile. "I know, sweetheart, but you're not alone. We're here. And your baby? They're strong, just like you." Emma took a shaky breath, holding onto those words as the room filled with the sound of monitors beeping, metal instruments clinking, and the hushed voices of the surgeons. Then, scalpel. She couldn't feel it, but she knew the incision had been made. Dr. Morgan's voice was steady as she spoke to the team. "Careful. The baby is larger than we expected. We need to make an extended incision." Emma could hear the intensity in her tone. She wanted to ask what was happening. Was her baby okay? But before she could get the words out, a loud, piercing cry filled the room. Her baby. Emma felt tears spill from her eyes, relief washing over her in a way she had never felt before. "The baby is out," one of the nurses announced. "Vitals," Dr. Morgan called. "Weak, but stable. They need oxygen immediately." Emma struggled to turn her head, desperate for a glimpse of her child. "Is my baby okay?" she gasped. A nurse rushed past her, carrying a tiny, fragile bundle wrapped in a towel. "It's a girl," Dr. Morgan said gently, her face softening. Emma let out a sob, pure love crashing over her. "A girl," she whispered, but the moment of relief was short-lived. Because suddenly, alarms began blaring. "Her heart rate is dropping." Dr. Morgan's voice turned sharp. "She's hemorrhaging. We need a transfusion. Now." Emma felt the world tilt. Everything around her blurred, the voices of the doctors and nurses fading into echoes. A sudden coldness washed over her, her vision tunneling into darkness. And just before she lost consciousness, she thought of her daughter. Her miracle. Her reason to fight. "Please," she whispered, "let me live." Then, everything went black. A second chance at life. The world was slipping away. Emma Harper floated in darkness, her body weightless, her mind drifting between memories and the unknown. There was no pain, just an eerie silence, as if she were caught between life and something far beyond it. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a faint peeping sound. A voice, muffled and urgent, calling her name. "Emma, stay with us." But it was hard to hold on. Her body felt cold, her breaths shallow. It would have been so easy to let go. But then, a sound broke through the void. A tiny cry. Emma's mind snapped into focus. That cry, her baby. She had fought so hard to bring her into the world. She couldn't leave now. With everything inside her, she fought against the pull of unconsciousness. And then, a rush of light, air, and overwhelming pain slammed into her all at once. Her eyes flew open. The hospital room was blurry at first, but the familiar beeping of the monitors and the steady hum of the machines told her she was still alive. Dr. Laura Morgan was standing beside her, relief washing over her face as she saw Emma's eyes flutter open. "Emma," she said softly, her voice warm. "You're awake." Emma blinked, her throat dry and her body aching everywhere. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a whisper. "My baby, Is she? Dr. Morgan smiled. She's alive, Emma. She's in the neonatal intensive care unit, but she's a fighter, just like you. Emma felt the dam break inside her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and pure love. Can I see her? She asked weakly. Dr. Morgan nodded. As soon as you're strong enough, we'll take you to her. But Emma, I need you to know something. We almost lost you. You suffered severe hemorrhaging during the surgery, and we had to perform an emergency procedure to stop the bleeding. Emma's heart pounded. Am I okay? Dr. Morgan hesitated for a brief moment before speaking gently. You're going to recover, but we had to make a difficult decision to save your life. The complications were too severe. Emma, we had to perform a hysterectomy. Emma stilled. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent years praying for a child, dreaming of more children, of a house full of laughter and tiny feet running across wooden floors. And now, that dream was over. She would never carry another child again. A heavy silence settled over the room. Dr. Morgan placed a gentle hand over Emma's. I know this is a lot to process, and I am so sorry. But you are here, and your baby is here. That's what matters right now. Emma swallowed hard, nodding, because she was alive. And she had a daughter waiting for her. Meeting her daughter. 2 days later, the nurses wheeled Emma into the neonatal intensive care unit. The air smelled of antiseptic, the soft beeping of machines filling the room. Rows of tiny incubators lined the walls, each holding fragile lives fighting to survive. Then, the nurse pushed her chair toward a particular incubator, and Emma's heart stopped. Inside was a tiny, delicate baby, wrapped in soft blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling with effort. Tubes and wires surrounded her, but she was alive. She's been doing so well, the nurse said with a smile. Would you like to hold her? Emma nodded fiercely, her arms already reaching out. The nurse gently lifted the baby and placed her in Emma's arms. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. Emma stared down at her daughter, her miracle. Her tiny fingers curled against Emma's chest, her soft breaths warming her skin. Hi, sweetheart, Emma whispered, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. On your mama. The baby made a tiny sound, snuggling closer to Emma's warmth. Tears slid down Emma's cheeks as a feeling she had never known before filled her entire being. This was love. Not the kind she had been told to expect in marriage, not the kind she had begged Jacob to give her. This was unbreakable, unconditional love. You saved me, she whispered to her daughter. I fought for you, but you gave me a reason to fight. The nurse wiped a tear from her own eyes. Do you have a name for her? Emma thought for a moment, then smiled. Hope, she said softly. Her name is Hope, because that's exactly what she was. A new beginning. Emma's recovery was slow, but every painful step was worth it. Jacob never returned to the hospital. He had lost his power over her, and she knew she would never let him near her child. Instead, she started over. A month later, as she cradled Hope in her arms, she signed a new lease for a small apartment in the city. She had no farm, no husband, no community whispering behind her back. But for the first time in her life, she had freedom. One evening, as she sat rocking Hope to sleep, she thought about everything she had endured. The lies, the betrayal, the loneliness, the pain. And yet, she had survived. We made it, baby girl, she whispered, pressing her lips to Hope's soft forehead. Hope stirred, making a tiny cooing noise, and Emma smiled through her tears. Because she finally knew the truth. She had spent years searching for love, for belonging, for purpose. And in the end, she had found it. In the soft heartbeat of her daughter. In the warmth of her own strength. In the life she had chosen for herself. And as she watched the city lights twinkle through the window, Emma Harper whispered a quiet, thankful prayer. Not to the God her community had forced upon her, but to the universe that had given her the one thing she had always longed for: a second chance, a final goodbye to the past, a first hello to the future. The night air was cool against Emma Harper's skin as she stood by the window of her new apartment, cradling her sleeping daughter in her arms. The city outside buzzed with life. Cars passing, people laughing in the distance, the neon glow of signs flickering on the glass. It was a world so different from the one she had left behind, a world where she wasn't confined by expectations, where she wasn't told that her suffering was part of God's plan. She exhaled slowly, watching Hope's tiny chest rise and fall, her delicate fingers wrapped around the fabric of Emma's shirt. Hope. Her name wasn't just something pretty. It was a promise. A promise that life could begin again, even after it had nearly ended. Emma let her eyes drift shut for a moment, the weight of the last few weeks settling deep in her bones. The pain, the loss, the fear, it had all brought her here. To this moment. To this child. The baby stirred, her little lips parting in a sleepy sigh, and Emma let out a quiet laugh. "You have no idea how much I needed you, little one," she whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. "I thought I was fighting for you, but the truth is, you saved me first." A soft knock at the door made Emma lift her head. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief moment, her old fears crept in. The fear that Jacob had found her, that the past wasn't done haunting her. But then she shook her head, reminding herself. She wasn't the same woman anymore. With Hope still in her arms, she walked to the door, her heart steady, her spine straight. And when she opened it, she found Dr. Laura Morgan standing there, a warm smile on her face. "I didn't mean to stop by so late," she said, glancing down at the bundle in Emma's arms. "But I just had to see how my two favorite fighters were doing." Emma smiled, stepping aside. "Come in," she said. Dr. Morgan entered, her eyes immediately softening as she looked at Hope. "She's beautiful," she murmured, "and she looks stronger already." Emma nodded. "She is." She glanced at Dr. Morgan, gratitude welling in her chest. "You saved us." Dr. Morgan shook her head, her voice gentle. "No, Emma, you saved yourself. All I did was help you get to the finish line." Emma swallowed hard, her vision blurring with tears. Because for the first time, she believed it. For years, she had waited for someone else to save her. She had prayed for Jacob's love, her community's approval, her mother's guidance, but none of them had given her what she truly needed. She had saved herself, and as she stood there, with her daughter nestled in her arms, her new life unfolding in front of her, Emma Harper did something she had never done before. She let go of Jacob's cruelty, of her mother's betrayal, of the years of being told she wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't strong. She let it all drift away, swallowed up by the night outside, lost in the city lights. And in its place, peace. For the first time in her life, Emma Harper was free. And as she held her daughter close, she whispered to the universe, "Thank you for this second chance." Then she turned to Dr. Morgan and smiled. "Would you like to hold her?" And as she passed her daughter into the arms of the woman who had helped her fight for her life, Emma Harper knew. The past was over. The future had begun. And she would never, ever look back again. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.